If you follow this comment, it'll take you to the first video in this series, which talks about the history of disbelieving CSA victims or recovered memories. This part is largely going to be on the false memory trend thing that happened in the 90s. This may well be triggering to CSA survivors, so be sure to take care of yourself. If now is not the right day to listen to this, remember you can save it. And I'm reading from the 3rd edition of the book, The Courage to Heal. I'm starting off from is referencing the backlash, people speaking out against their abusers, basically. Who supports the backlash? The supporters of the backlash are varied. Some people get involved because they are indeed innocent and have been falsely accused. But for many others, the backlash provides a convenient cover. Abusers, obviously, would be eager to take advantage of any group whose mission is to vindicate those accused of abuse. Likewise, PDFs and PDF advocacy groups, such as the Renee Guyon Society and NAMBLA, N-A-M-B-L-A, stand to benefit from the silencing of survivors. Spouses who are unable to face the fact that their partner abused their child have embraced the idea that many reports of sexual abuse are false. Family members and well-meaning friends often find it more tolerable to believe in false accusation than to accept that someone they know and love could have abused a child. Among professionals, a number of those who endorse the false memory theory have little to no clinical experience with survivors. Some have specialized in unrelated areas and are uninformed about the impact of trauma or the pattern of perpetrators. Others have been moved by the obvious pain of accused parents who, whether or not they abuse their children, are clearly suffering. Still others, concerned with issues of suggestibility, have erroneously gone on to challenge the credibility of all survivors who remember their abuse as adults. And finally, those who serve as expert witnesses for the defense of the accused perpetrators have a clear professional and financial stake in discrediting survivors. Journalists have played a role as well. By presenting sensationalized and distorted stories, they have legitimized a climate of disbelief. Anna Salter, adjunct professor at Dartmouth Medical School, has served as an expert witness for child victims and has been shocked by the subsequent media coverage. She says, "I've been in court on cases that I didn't recognize on television. That happened to me last year. When they told me the case I was seeing on television was the case I had testified in, it was hard for me to believe it. A reporter decided that this was a case of overzealous prosecutors and that the father was falsely accused. The reporter completely neglected to bring forth the man's history of touching children. Yes, you would have gotten incensed by what was presented on TV. The problem is that it had nothing to do with the facts of the case." Why do so many journalists present one-sided, erroneous accounts? The subject is dramatic and controversial. It sells papers, improves ratings, makes great sound bites. It grabs the attention of even the most jaded reader. The appeal of these stories, however, goes far beyond our national obsession with sex, violence, and broken families. Anti-survivor propaganda has found a receptive audience with the public at large. People read about the false memory syndrome and are readily convinced. Why? Because denying the reality of child sexual abuse appeals to a basic human need, the need to distance ourselves from human cruelty. It is painful to face the reality that so many children were and continue to be severely abused. There are times when the stories we hear are so horrible we want to deny their truth. It is far easier to call it fantasy, manipulation, fabrication. Easier to say that someone has been brainwashed into believing they were abused than to face the possibility that this person endured such torments as a child. This is not to say that our movement is beyond reproach. Anytime there is such massive social progress, serious and harmful mistakes are inevitably made. Children have been re-traumatized in courtrooms, interviewing procedures have been flawed, and families have been reunited prematurely. Some therapists working with adult survivors have pushed clients to acknowledge abuse or have attributed problems to abuse that did not occur. False allegations have been made. Such transgressions need to be confronted and challenged, but in no way do they diminish the pain suffered by the vast majority of men and women who are coming forward to say they were sexually abused, or the integrity of the dedicated professionals who work with them. The truth about the backlash. When you watch shows or read reports about false memories, you may feel angry and betrayed, but not know how to respond. When the coverage of this debate is filled with interviews with well-credentialed experts, sympathetic portrayals of accused parents, and scientific-sounding evidence, about the nature of memory, it can sometimes be hard to keep your equilibrium. By analyzing the claims of the false memory argument and examining the organizations behind the backlash, we hope to give you a clearer perspective on these attacks and to provide information that you can use to respond effectively. There is no such thing as false memory syndrome. The cornerstone of the current backlash is the promotion of the concept of false memory syndrome. In fact, no such syndrome exists, as psychotherapist Karen O'Leo makes clear. Syndrome usually refers to a documented group of signs and symptoms that characterize a particular abnormality. In this case, however, there have been no clinical trials, no scientifically controlled comparison groups, no research to document or quantify the phenomena. Syndrome is used simply to create an aura of scientific legitimacy. The creation of an official label seeks to establish by its mere existence the legitimacy of a phenomenon that has yet to be verified. Mary Harvey, director of the Victims of Violence program at Cambridge Hospital, concurs. There is no such thing as false memory syndrome. There is psychosis, there is hallucination and delusion, and there is outright lying and malingering. There is also bad clinical practice. There is, however, no false memory syndrome, and no evidence to support the proposition that such a syndrome, or a genuine memory syndrome for that matter, ought to be placed in our DSM lexicon of psychiatric diagnoses. 17 distinguished academic researchers in the fields of memory and trauma were so concerned about the use of the term false memory syndrome that they wrote a letter to the American Psychological Society. We, as a group of researchers from diverse areas, share a common concern for the responsibility of psychology as a science. While we strongly support research aimed at understanding the veracity of memory, we urge a more even-handed approach to this topic. In particular, we object to the term false memory syndrome, a non-psychological term originated by a private foundation whose stated purpose is to support accused parents. Psychiatrist Judith Herman adds, "The very name FMS is prejudicial and misleading. There is no such syndrome. And we have no evidence that the reported memories are false. We only know that they are disputed." The false memory syndrome then has been created not by scientific research, but through the use of highly emotional anecdotal reports and an effective public relations campaign. When Pamela, executive director of the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, was interviewed in Treating Abuse Today, she was unable to provide even a basic definition of false memory syndrome, excusing her inability by saying she was not a clinician. The interviewer said, "If I was talking to the executive director of the Muscular Dystrophy Association, who presumably is not a clinician, I'll bet he or she could give me the signs and symptoms of muscular dystrophy. But in the case of false memory syndrome, so far no one seems to be able to say." She says, "Gotcha. I'm in agreement with you. There are some soft areas here that need to be clarified." The False Memory Syndrome Foundation is an advocacy group for people who say they have been falsely accused of child abuse. The group most frequently cited in promoting the idea of false memories is the False Memory Syndrome Foundation. Despite their official sounding title, this foundation is not primarily a scientific search organization. Rather, it is an advocacy group for people who say they have been falsely accused of child sexual abuse. The foundation prints dramatic accounts by women who say they were mistreated by unethical and incompetent therapists. These stories are presented as though they represented the customary practices of counselors who work with survivors. The foundation disparages the contributions of both individual survivors and those who have worked to support them. When interviewed for the newspapers, magazines, or talk shows, members of the organization and its scientific advisory board repeatedly debunk the testimony of survivors. The FMS Foundation presents information that is out of context and distorted. Psychiatrist Richard Laustein, a past president of the International Society for the Study of Multiple Personality and Dissociation, explains, "The FMS Foundation's written materials are selective, biased, and incomplete in their fragmentary reviews of selected articles and books in their childhood traumatic literature. Their main goal is media propaganda dressed up in the garb of apparent objectivity." The FMS Foundation has an advisory board of well-credentialed professionals from prominent universities. However, a founding member of this board, who has since resigned, has engaged in questionable practices designed to intimidate therapists and squelch academic debate. The FMS Foundation has distributed questionnaires to accused parents requesting information about their adult child's therapist. Their literature has encouraged parents to file complaints against these therapists with state licensing boards. Although they concede that, quote, parents would seem to have no cause for malpractice against the therapist, unquote, they go on to suggest that, quote, the parent may have cause for libel and slander and for torturous interference with a family relationship, unquote. As if such challenges to therapists were not sufficient, they go on to propose that the possibility that parents usurp legal control over the entirety of their adult children's lives. Quote, lastly, and even more remotely, the parent may take the legal position that the accusing child is incompetent and may seek guardianship proceedings, unquote. This is getting too long again. I will do a part 3 that will go into why the FMS Foundation was started. Spoiler, it was started by a set of parents that were accused by their daughter. There's just a lot to it, and it's crazy. So follow me so you get the next part.